many sides are now using this very bellicose language, looking ahead to next week, that if there's no progress, so at that point we'll find out if there's no progress, is this a bluff? Or are the Americans really onto something? I mean, to pull your diplomats out right across the Middle East, and further abroad, actually. And then the Department of Defense has also told the families of military personnel who live in the Middle East, look, you might want to consider leaving as well.
The UN watchdog has found that Iran is not complying with its nuclear obligations. Well, that news comes with reports that Israel could be planning an attack then on Iran's nuclear sites. That could be as early as next week. Alongside this developing story, America has told its non-essential diplomats in Iraq to get out of the country because of threats from Iran to US military bases in the region. Here to get us up to speed with these very much heightened tensions, joining Drive is Tim Marshall, the former foreign correspondent and author of Prisoners of Geography. Tim, good afternoon.
Hello, Rosie.
I think we need the wider context of this, if you can. Iran have effectively been building up material to potentially build nuclear weapons. It looks like from the latest report they've got enough enriched uranium to maybe make 9 nuclear bombs. And other countries are particularly concerned and may act as a result. Can you explain for us what's happening?
I can try.
Please.
If you enrich uranium isotope 235 for the purposes of fueling a nuclear reactor for power to put the lights on, you need to enrich it to between 3 and 5%. What the Iranians have been spending years doing and have now accomplished is enriching it to 60%. There's no need to do that at all. Now, that's very close to weapons grade material. Getting to 3.5, getting all the way up to 20% is really quite difficult, but then you can sprint to 60% quite relatively easily. And the point being that from 60% to weapons grade material is a short hop, skip and a jump. And so they are now in the position where within just a few weeks of making a decision, they could have a nuclear weapon. So the other context is, and this is where we get into potential bluff or are you bluffing? You've seen the IAE report this week. We've seen the Americans. I looked at their State Department's advisory note for travel. It couldn't be more stark. It says, do not travel to Iraq for any reason. And I'll come back to why it's Iraq. This weekend in Oman is the 6th round of talks, direct talks between Iran and the Americans. Well, they've gone nowhere. And given the news we've just had, plus the fact that the talks aren't going anywhere.
And these talks, are to try and prevent them building up their nuclear capabilities.
Yes. The deal is the Americans are saying you can enrich from outside the country to 3.5% and then ship it in. Everyone's happy. The Iranians are saying you don't get to tell us what to do. So if nothing happens at the weekend, at that point, the fear is the Israelis might finally, their patience might snap. So why Iraq? It's because the Iranians have always said, if Israel ever attacks our nuclear facilities, we won't just hold them responsible, we'll hold the Americans responsible. And all these targets right across the Middle East, American targets, could be hit. And that's why they're saying, don't travel to Iraq. Some of you leave town. And just this afternoon, Rosie, the State Department's issued some new advice for government employees in Israel. From now on, do not travel outside of the Greater Tel Aviv or the Greater Jerusalem area. So it could just be intimidation ahead of the talks, sign here, or they could genuinely be thinking, if this collapses at the weekend, there could be action next week. And of course, we don't know.
Yes, taking these actions like telling, non-essential diplomats to get out of the country, you also potentially are escalating because the image you're giving to the world is we believe that this could be happening.
That is the problem, because if you're using this, it's diplomatic signaling, and sometimes you can even signal via firepower. You choose how much you send and what you hit, and hope the other side reads the message. But of course, it's exceptionally dangerous. And if the Israelis did attack, and it's a big if, the Iranians, if they then attacked the Americans, would pull them in, and things would very quickly get out of hand. But the Iranians are doing the same sort of thing. Their defense minister said on Wednesday, after hearing this news that the Americans are telling people to leave, They said that we will attack these American targets without hesitation right across the Middle East. So it could be a giant game of bluff. It could be to put the pressure on the Iranians ahead of Sunday's meeting in Oman, or it really could be that the Americans have got intelligence or have been given the nod by the Israelis. Look, guys, thanks for trying 6 rounds of talks, but if you're not getting anywhere, we're going to do something about it. Final bit of this jigsaw, though, is that the Israelis don't actually have the kit, the equipment, to smash through the Iranian and into the nuclear facilities. Some of them are buried like 80 meters inside mountains. Only the Americans have the ordnance that would get through those levels of concrete and rock. So it's a watch and wait. And I think we nearly need to see what happens on Sunday in Oman.
Yeah, how those talks go. Yeah. I mean, sanctions used to be used, particularly by the US, as a tool that worked fairly effectively against Iran building up its nuclear capabilities. It seems at this point, diplomatic efforts, bearing what happens on Sunday, are looking sort of increasingly futile.
It doesn't look good. Mr. Trump... President Trump said something about, look, we still want this to end well, but hey, it might not. And he's really piling on that pressure. Basically, the previous Trump administration in his first presidency pulled out of a very big deal, the JCPOA it's called, that was signed with Iran, with many different countries, that they could enrich, but only to a certain level. And there wouldn't be a level of sanctions. Well, he pulled out of that. It's fallen apart. The sanctions don't really work against Iran. And of course, they're very close to the Russians who help them with the sanctions, as do the Chinese, to get round them. And so, no, there is still a stick waving over them, which is that a lot of the Europeans could reimpose the sanctions. We're not there yet, although the IAEA report this week has actually made that more likely. But at the moment, the problem is that many sides are now using this very bellicose language, looking ahead to next week, that if there's no progress, so at that point we'll find out if there's no progress, is this a bluff or are the Americans really onto something? I mean, to pull your diplomats out right across the Middle East, and further abroad, actually. And then the Department of Defense has also told the families of military personnel who live in the Middle East, look, you might want to consider leaving as well. This is what you do ahead of when you expect things to go bang. So they could be using it as a sort of pressure, or they could genuinely be so nervous that they're getting people out of harm's way.
Absolutely. Tim, thank you for the very comprehensive explainer that we needed. Tim Marshall, former foreign correspondent, author of The Prisoners of Geography.